If there's one thing every veterinarian wishes they had more of, it's support. Someone to help you keep up, think ahead, and take some pressure off your day. That's exactly why ScribeNote created Companion, your personal veterinary workflow assistance. It's like having another vet or assistant following you around through your day, helping you get things done faster and with less stress. There's Sumi, the history companion, who can take a big, messy medical history and instantly summarize the key details. There's Quill, the writing companion. Ask him to tidy up your notes, change the tone, fix formatting, or even translate, and he'll handle it for you. And there's Sage, the research companion, who deep dives into trusted veterinary sources and brings you clear answers with citations so you can make decisions quickly and confidently. You can try them all as part of the free plan and see what it's like to have real backup in your workflow. Just head to scribenote.com to learn more. Welcome to another episode of Reviving Vet Med. Let's be honest, feedback is one of those words that can make a room go a little tense. It doesn't really matter whether you're the one giving it or receiving it. In veterinary medicine especially, it can land fast, feel personal, and sometimes hit a nervous system that's already stretched pretty thin. And yet it's something we rely on every single day to keep teams functioning and patients safe. My guest today is Dr. Bethany Weinheimer, an emergency veterinarian, executive leader, and transformational coach, and the founder and CEO of the Evolved Vets. She brings a really unique blend of ER experience, leadership at Veg ER for Pets, and a deep focus on neuroscience, nervous system regulation, and values-based leadership. She now works with high-achieving veterinarians to help move them out of survival mode and into more aligned, sustainable ways of working and leading without losing themselves in the process. And there's a bit of a personal connection here too. I used to do contract work with Veg ER for Pets, so I've seen firsthand the kind of environments that she's helped shape. And in a small full circle moment, my daughter's name is also Bethany. In this conversation, we dig into what's actually happening in our nervous system during feedback conversations, how to regulate in real time, and how we can start to shift feedback from something that feels threatening into something more collaborative and human. So let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Dr. Bethany Weinheimer.
This is the Reviving Vet Med podcast, and I'm your host, Dr. Marie Hollowaychuk. And my mission is to improve the mental health and well-being of veterinary professionals around the world.
Hi, Bethany. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. So we both have, I guess, the luxury, the fun of working in the ER, where, of course, we're making split-second decisions. We're constantly course correcting. But biologically, when it comes to feedback, human brains often perceive feedback as a literal threat to survival. I'm wondering if you can walk us through what is actually happening to our nervous system when we receive that unexpected or tough feedback.
Absolutely. Let's break it down. So there's a concept called neuroception, where essentially our brain subconsciously is like functioning as a radar. So it's keeping an eye out for anything that might be an internal or an external threat to our system. And this is usually based on previous experiences, maybe if we've previously received negative feedback or our love or worth was associated or tied to performance. That can feel, when it's given unexpectedly, really scary. And what happens to our nervous system is that amygdala gets triggered and we have what's called an amygdala hijack. And that puts out different hormones such as cortisol, adrenaline. What we notice is our heart rate will spike, our breathing will pick up. Our blood gets diverted to our major organs like it's supposed to when we hit a sympathetic phase. And essentially, when we hit those moments, we're scanning for the threat. Okay, is my status threatened? Am I still going to be respected if I get this feedback? Is my certainty, my livelihood, how I receive money, how I take care of myself and my family, is that going to be safe in these moments? And so usually our amygdala is jumping straight from I have feedback to your job is on the line. And that's a very dramatic jump for many of us in the veterinary space and even outside of the veterinary space. So what we need to do when our amygdala starts being flooded and our prefrontal cortex actually downshifts is find ways to re-trigger that prefrontal cortex so we can regulate a little bit more easy. But that's essentially what happens to the body. We are in fight or flight, freeze or appease mode. And that's the thing that makes feedback so scary because our body can't tell the difference between a perceived threat and an actual threat. The neurology behind it is all the same. So that's really where those moments that feel unexpected can feel like life or death or job or no job.
Wow, you broke it down so well. And I can relate to so much of that. And I think we've all been in situations in our lives and in our careers where we've received that really unexpected news, right? And maybe it wasn't necessarily feedback, but it was something happened and something changed and maybe a relationship changed and we felt really blindsided. And so it's interesting when I hear you talk about that, I think a lot about this notion where people will take that feedback really personally, right? Where it's not just about what is being said about what that person did, but it becomes about who they are as a person. And when I think of my biggest moments going into fight or flight, perhaps there's been some worry about I could lose this job. Oftentimes it's a worry about they think I'm a bad vet or they think I'm a bad person. And that as well triggers that fight or flight response, right? Nobody wants to feel shame or not part of the group or anything like that. Could you speak a little bit to that experience? Does that track with what you've seen as well?
Yes, it definitely does. In all the women vet professionals that I help coach and lead, this is a common theme. And I actually have a whole podcast episode on it, focus on the idea of perfectionism, because it's not only our own self-worth that we tie to our job, but it's, you don't want someone in the group huddle saying, why did you not give that antibiotic? It's industry wide and it is something that deeply affects. So when we think about being a veterinarian or being in these high pressure situations, how do we start to separate who we are from what we do? And many times in previous generations, they've studied this in veterinary medicine, but it is, I am a veterinarian and not I'm a veterinarian and I'm a mom and I'm a sister and I have a life partner or, fill in the blank to all the millions of things that you can be. But think about it. Many of us from the time we're 3 or, a young age, we decide I'm going to be a veterinarian. And so our entire life and structure is built on a plan that's executing on this goal of becoming a veterinarian. So your whole life becomes, I want to be a veterinarian. I'm in the process of becoming a veterinarian, maybe with vet school or, undergraduate degree. And then finally we get to this place of, I am a veterinarian. And that's such an honor because we've worked our whole lives to get there. But we forget that there's so many other components about who we are, and our self-worth isn't determined by how we perform in a job. It's determined by so many other things, and living in alignment with our own authentic values and what looks like success and looks like happiness for each individual is going to be different.
Yeah, so many important points. And yes, I think a lot of things that our listeners are going to relate to. You talk a lot in your work and in your coaching about moving from surviving to thriving. And of course, when we think about the fight or flight response, it really is a survival mechanism. And nobody wants to feel like they're in sympathetic nervous system overdrive all the time. And certainly not through these feedback conversations, because like you said, when we're in fight or flight mode, our prefrontal cortex is not online. We're not able to rationalize and take in and process the feedback that we're receiving. We're just thinking about, how do I survive this moment? And how do I still keep my job or whatever it is, like you said. So this is one of the biggest questions that I get asked. If a person, whether it's a leader or a practitioner or a technician or associate, knows that they have to give tough feedback, or maybe they've just been called into the manager's office or the owner's office to receive that feedback, can you give us 2 or 3 really tangible evidence-based practices that people can use within a span of like a minute so that they can regulate that nervous system to stop that amygdala hijack and get themselves back into regulation?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Marie. I love this question because oftentimes when we are in that survival mode, it is turned off. Our prefrontal cortex just downgrades. And so finding short, quick ways to bring that prefrontal cortex back online is so important. And so I have 3 very small things that you as the giver of the feedback or even the receiver of the feedback can apply. The first is going to be physiological sigh. And I'll describe it and then I'll give you an example of what that is like and then tell you a few tips and tricks you can add to it as well. So it's going to be a double inhale through the nose. And then for me personally, I love to hold that as long as possible. And then I exhale extra long. And so it would sound something like this. Hold and then exhale. Whoo. And what I find is when you have the CO2 getting offloaded, that actually helps trigger your parasympathetic state. So it downregulates that sympathetic nervous system response, that amygdala that was just turned on. And it actually says, let's push the brake pedal a little bit. Let's slow down. And actually the science behind this part is when you say voo or as one might hear in like traditional meditation practices, that actually really helps trigger that parasympathetic nervous system just a little bit faster because you're humming and it's vibrating throughout the neck. So usually when I'm doing these practices, as long as I'm in an environment where I'm not in front of a customer or something like that, I will physically allow sound to come out as a way to help calm just one notch down. And usually I do that 3 or 4 times. I recommend to my clients to do that 3 or 4 times because in just less than 60 seconds, you can go through an entire breathing pattern and that really helps. The second trick that I have is grounding and then reorienting. And what this looks like, grounding is a practice to kind of bring yourself back into your body. So it might look like squeezing your hands together. You can wiggle your toes inside your shoes. Sometimes it's like patting your hand against your leg. Anything you can do to just recall your body back to being the present state. And then after you do the grounding exercise, you can do something called an orienting response. And it essentially tells your nervous system, hey, there's no predator here. You're safe to engage. And what this looks like is just identifying 3 things in the room in that moment and describing them. So maybe it's, oh, there's a black telephone with a red light blinking and it's got a really nice coralled cord and it's, about 3 feet away from me and I hear it ringing now. And then you can go through different objects to actually bring your body back to present state. Another trick with this one is like the concept of flying above the room. So when you're in the moment of receiving feedback or giving feedback, you can actually lessen the physiological response by envisioning yourself and watching the interaction as it's happening. So it feels less like an attack and more like an observation. And then the third trick that I have is like name it to tame it. And this was really helpful. This really is kind of the beginning of my journey down this neuroplasticity study. And it's essentially saying like, name the emotion. So I'm feeling anxious and putting that into words actually like almost decreases the volume on the intensity that we're feeling that feeling. So usually what my internal language and what I recommend saying is something like this, like, okay, I'm feeling stressed and anxious right now. Those are completely normal feelings. This is a normal part of my human experience. And my goal is to go into this meeting with love and compassion and keeping an open mind. So I'm focusing on the goal. And then usually I do some sort of breath work, usually the breath that we just talked about earlier. And then I'm able to say like, okay, I'm centered and I'm ready to approach this conversation. Even though I know my heart rate is probably still going to be a little elevated, how do I picture that as my body being better prepared for the challenge as opposed to panic and stress? And so that's essentially 3 tips that I have for someone who is getting called into the manager office for feedback, or they've been preparing for feedback, but it can be anxiety inducing to administer feedback as well. So those are my 3 quick tips you can do in 60 seconds.
So very helpful. So many things going through my mind. And as you were describing it, I felt myself doing it. And I was like, yeah, it really has a good impact on the nervous system. And it's funny, in my residency, I had a resident mate who was always humming in the ICU. And I started to realize that she would be humming, especially when she was very stressed. So it was like a telltale sign, but I'm sure it was a calming strategy, a coping strategy for her. It's that vagal nerve stimulation at the back of our throats. So I love that. And physiologic sigh, I always joke, that's like what dogs do, right? makes sense that we would want to do it too. So many great strategies there. Thank you for sharing those. So you are a certified 3 vital questions coach, and you help people shift out of the dreaded drama triangle. So I love this, where there's the victim, the rescuer, and the persecutor. And your goal is to move people into the empowerment dynamic with the creator, the challenger, and the coach. So I'm wondering how we can relate this to feedback in the workplace. How does feedback have a tendency to accidentally trigger that drama triangle? And how can we reframe it to make it a more collaborative coaching moment instead?
I love that you bring up the 3 Vital Questions book and training. It is so imperative to understand the roles that we play when we are kind of falling into that drama. And just as a flag, this is completely normal. We all fall into these drama roles from time to time. It's the ability to recognize when we fall into those roles and then pivot, like you said, that reframe afterward that really matters. So when we experience feedback, the way we typically see that come out in these 3 different roles are: 1, the receiver usually slides into that victim role. And it can sound something like, I don't deserve this feedback. They never liked me anyway. They're doing this to me. They just don't get it. I'm powerless. I have no say here. Right. So that is our mind going into a victim role and telling us a story that's, for me, I have no authority over my life or direction over the next steps. And then usually in this victim's mind, the other person is the persecutor, the one who gives the feedback. And we can sometimes fall into the drama role if we're a persecutor and we're giving feedback that's maybe not with a good intention, right? If we're doing it out of judgment or criticism, instead of showing up to give feedback in a way that is kind and trusting and believing that that person can grow and change. And that can even show up sometimes when we give vague feedback. And then the third role, like you mentioned, is the rescue role. And so the rescuer, in my mind, in the drama setting and when giving feedback, kind of shows up in 2 ways. 1, you might have the rescuer role show up as the sidekick that lets the victim mindset person vent on the floor in front of patients, right? And the question with that person, they have good intentions usually, but the idea becomes, are you allowing the drama to spread? Are you perpetuating the drama by allowing it to keep spewing everywhere? And then the second way that I see it come up is maybe playing the rescuer part of the role a little bit more people pleaser, which means I have feedback to give, but I don't feel comfortable saying it because it might damage the relationship. It's not my job to deliver that feedback. But really, if you're being impacted by the situation, it's okay to give feedback. You don't need a leadership title. These are skills that every person can lean into and adapt and grow in. The way that I see communication and feedback is very similar to the way I look at medicine. It's always growing and changing and adapting. And so these are really the 3 roles that we see when it comes to drama. And then when I think about like applying the 3 vital questions concept to get to a more creator-like mindset, I think about 1 question, which is, where are you putting your focus? Are you focusing on what happened to you, how you don't deserve it? Or are you starting to think about like the outcome? And questions, when you focus on the outcome, might sound something like, what can I learn from this? Is there any truth to this feedback? Have I ever heard this feedback before? Is there patterns that I could reflect on previously in my life? Or, from the rescuer role, if you're becoming more of a challenger, you might say, how can I help this colleague by sharing information with them? Can I be open enough and challenge myself enough to make this feedback I can share in a kind and thoughtful way? So it's really all around focusing on your mindset, and is it problem focused or is it outcome focused? And so when I think about feedback in the drama roles, that's really how I start to apply it in a very kind and thoughtful way. The drama triangle is usually us running on autopilot. And when we can recognize we're in those drama roles and say, actually, what can I learn here? This isn't happening to me. It's happening for me. What can I learn? How can this make me a better doctor, a better leader, a better nurse, a tech? All of those things can make us better if we let it. If we keep avoiding the conflict or pushing it off or pushing off the feedback, then, there's not a ton of growth in that type of mindset. And usually those patterns will repeat time and time again until you learn the lesson.
Yeah, isn't that the truth?
I like to think about the challenger is someone that is like helping you do personal training. There's somebody that's like, hey, you committed to doing your growth plan, in your feedback in our last one-on-one. And, I've given you 2 extensions. So we're 3 months behind the due date. Like, I know that you can do this. Show me what steps you're going to take next. So it's like an accountability with love. It's like that personal trainer being like, okay, you can do 15 more. I got you. 5 more, And then the way that I see the coach is the same thing, just asking a few more questions. So the same situation as that challenger, but instead I would say, what do you need from me to help you? Do you need an outline? How can I check in with you in thoughtful ways? So to me, they're very similar and they overlap in many ways. And I think the core of this is really going back to principles from cognitive behavioral therapy, which is like your thoughts start to shape your beliefs, which shape your actions, and that leads to our habits. And then that leads to our lifestyle, right? So if we can really root down to our thoughts and switching between those different roles, that's how we really get to success and staying in that empowerment dynamic.
Fabulous. I love this. Thank you so much for explaining that to me. Leadership can feel isolating, even when you're doing everything right. That's why I'm launching the Veterinary Leadership Collective, a facilitated peer coaching space for practice owners, managers, medical directors, and team leads. This isn't another webinar. It's a monthly opportunity to connect with peers, work through real leadership challenges, and get support from people who truly understand. Founding member registration opens this summer and space is limited. Learn more at revivingvetmed.com/collective. So you, in your work with VetGR for Pets, you've helped open and manage several busy ER hospitals. These are fast-paced, chaotic, and emotionally charged environments. And having time to sit down and give someone a formal 30-minute feedback session is not always realistic. And like you said, we don't want to put these things off. We don't want to sweep it under the rug. What does effective, psychologically safe, on-the-fly feedback look like in a high-stress workplace? Because even for our folks who don't work in the ER, they're still in fast-paced veterinary environments. So what's your advice?
I think step 1, you already highlighted, and I'll just reiterate a little bit, the concept of psychological safety and having a place where you can share your opinions and you can speak up without being fearful of being shamed or blamed. That's the first step. It's commonly thought of as like, help your people love you. Create a place where y'all can have that candor, and that is going to be step 1. And then I think there's a few different environments, especially in the ER, that we can see it show up. But as you pointed out, it can show up in any setting because ER is high volume stress at times. And so I would say feedback can be small. It can be immediate. Like, can we give that correction in a kind, thoughtful way in 10 seconds? And so these micro feedbacks, whether that be positive feedback or negative feedback, are going to be able to make feedback feel a little bit more safe. And as we talked about earlier, psychological safety is important, but also since we tend to identify as veterinarians, and that's a lot of our identity, this makes it a little bit better to give those small micro feedbacks, and they know they can trust you because you're there for their best interest. And so one way that I think of it is to pull them to the side, right? And maybe this is like in asking permission, hey, do you have 2 minutes? I would love to go over that case with you, right? So your nervous system, it's in the moment. You're telling them it's going to be quick. It's only 2 minutes. You can survive 2 minutes. And it really keeps them in that safety because you're opening up with curiosity. You're asking if they have the capacity for it in that moment. And everybody wants to be a little bit better at the case they just saw, right? We all want to be amazing doctors, as you pointed out earlier. And then I think another one is starting with curiosity, right? Hey, how are you doing today? When that third triage came in earlier, I saw your tone sharpen a little bit with the receptionist. And the impact was that your teammate, your fellow doctor, has taken that third triage. And now I'm noticing that the receptionist isn't approaching you specifically. The impact is that she has kind of pulled back a little bit from these moments. So I just wanted to ask, like, is there anything going on today that you need help with? I know we both really want team cohesion and patient safety. Is there anything I can do to help you get there? Right. So you're giving that feedback. It's not about them. It's just about the action. You're saying it factually. I love using the SBI model, which is situation, behavior, impact, whether I'm giving positive or negative feedback. That's what I teach in my course. And it is so helpful because whether it's positive feedback and it's easily remembered and you're highlighting the exact thing that they did well, on the flip side, you can say, hey, you had a sharp tone with that receptionist and now she's pulling back. And it's not about them, right? We're intentionally separating that identity piece from them into this like small action that happened that we can mold and change over time. And then I think the second format that I usually see this in is kind of that real time in a group setting, which takes a lot more finesse. But let's say, for example, like you're sitting at the triage table or the doctor's island and you have that triage walk in and you're the leader on shift and you're trying to find a way to psychologically that's safe, still have the accountability in that real time feedback. So if I was a leader in that situation, I might say, hey, who's got this next triage, right? The customer's there, they're waiting to be triaged. And it's me having accountability. This is what a good question for a coach/challenger would be using our 3BQ example. They know that I know that they're supposed to be triaging the pet and I'm doing it in a kind way. And so that's like one really easy way to do it in a busy ER setting. And then I think, of course, like you think about those moments of closed loop communication, think about a code, right? You're giving real time feedback. Hey, we need another low dose epi. And they follow back up with that closed loop communication. So feedback doesn't have to be scary. And I think the more we normalize it, the easier it is. And then I think one other thing I'd add is like the debrief afterward is so important. If we do something in a group setting, it's okay to say, hey guys, I noticed that the two of us were waiting to go triage that case. Like, let's debrief. What do we think went well? What can we do better next time? Do y'all want to, set on alternating and tell each other when you're overwhelmed or ask the next person, hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. Do you mind taking this case? Like, how can we stimulate communication to where the goal of treating that pet as soon as possible is still happening, but y'all are also communicating as teammates or with the CPR debrief, right? When we have a code, doing a debrief after, what do you think went well? What do you think could do better? And it also gives you an opportunity as the leader to show them how to receive feedback well. As a great leader, it's a good thing to practice. Like, oh yeah, I could totally do that better. Thank you so much for calling that out, right? Because then it teaches them the next time you give feedback, it's not personal.
Yeah, it normalizes it. I appreciate that. And these are just so many great points. And going back to what you shared with the SBI initially, I think it's so important to give the feedback in a way that is as specific as possible, right? As detailed as possible. And so I love that framework to set it up that way, focusing on the behavior and the impact that it had as well. So really, really great recommendations. And I love that, again, these don't have to be long, drawn out things. It can just be as simple as getting curious, asking a question, and opening it up to receiving feedback in response. I want to talk a little bit about the aftermath of feedback. I think that sometimes, I know I've experienced feedback conversation that goes objectively well. It feels okay, but we still go home with a vulnerability hangover, as Brene Brown likes to call it. Or from a neurologic standpoint, what would be considered residual somatic stress. Given your background in preventing burnout, how do you recommend that professionals process and discharge that stress so that it doesn't turn into that chronic exhaustion that we can see with burnout?
I love this question. It's something that I've been lecturing on this year, the concept of beating burnout. So thinking about how these moments where our body is triggered with adrenaline and cortisol and actually thinking about, okay, now that the conversation's over, we move through the quote threat that we are facing. And now what do we do with the stimulation that comes afterward? And I have a few tips for people who maybe have just gone through and received feedback or have given feedback and they maybe are spiraling on, okay, did it go well? Are they still going to be my friend after? Like, do they still like me as a boss? Like there's so many questions that go through your mind after giving feedback. So I think one tip is just going and having physical movement. Sometimes it's going on a walk, or some people love spin classes, or some people like dancing it out. I have plenty of friends who love doing this form of like dance therapy, and that totally works for them. But find a way to take the heightened emotions, the heightened cortisol, and release it from your body. Just complete that cycle of feedback and complete it in a way that allows you to completely release. A run, maybe you're doing breath work like we talked about before. There's another breath work technique that I use in my meditations. It's called the box breath. And so essentially you breathe in for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for another 4. And those small moments of just like releasing, doing the humming or whatever works for you. Sometimes for me, it's like a bubble bath, just telling my body like, okay, you're going to be safe. It's safe now. Like we can completely detox and de-stress. And I think another one is going to be co-regulation, right? Maybe you find someone to give a hug to afterwards, or just releasing. Sometimes it's scream singing in your car on the way home, or sometimes it's crying. I'm a crier. Once my peak emotion level is hit, usually I cry a little bit afterwards. And so finding ways to express creativity is another one. And then, of course, like the one that I deeply relate to and I have developed for the Evolved Vets method is the concept of meditation, elevation, and integration, which are 3 different types of meditation. The first is understanding your limiting belief. That's meditation. And usually you do that from reflecting on childhood or something that's happened to you in the past. Elevation is going to be the second step, and that's kind of choosing a new belief. So if you're struggling with, am I worthy because I received this feedback? The next step would be like, I am worthy, and starting to believe that and picture someone who you look up to who really does a great job embodying their self-worth. And then the third step is going to be integration, which is the actual embodiment and going on a walk and feeling what it feels like to know that your self-worth is high. And so I think these are really important components that can't be underrated at this point. I think it's so important to do the internal work. I think if you want to be the best leader, the best human possible, the internal work is the stuff that really leads to the most long-term success and your sustainability in veterinary medicine, which I know you talk a lot about on your podcast too.
Yeah, I love this. And you're absolutely right. We need that. That is necessary so that we can learn from these situations and get back to our baseline and take it forward. So really, really great, tangible advice. I love that. Through the Evolved Vets, you work closely with high-achieving women who are often incredibly self-critical. We've touched on this a little bit. The people who are so good at their jobs that no one notices they're falling apart. How must we adapt our feedback style when dealing with a high achiever who might internalize that small critique as a massive failure? So I touched on this a little bit before, like the shame spiral, sometimes that we can go into where I hear what they're saying and logically I know that this is just about this thing, but I'm making it about me as a person. And now I'm giving so much more meaning to it. Talk us through what your thoughts are on that whole process.
I love that you call this one out because it's so true. When we have high performers who tend to be type A perfectionists, like many of us in the veterinary space, we're usually 10 times harder on ourselves than, the people around us. So I think that's important to remember when we go into these feedback conversations, either as a colleague and a peer or as a leader. It's important to know that we ideally do enough preparation and practice to deliver it in the most kind way possible because their nervous system is going to be stressed and that is okay. And so this is a little bit where I think about intentionally separating their behavior from their identity. And so usually I'll use an example like, hey, this is about your discharge. Can we talk about your discharge notes not being done on time? We have an RDBM that really, or referring vet who really needed this paperwork. It's not about you being a good or a bad doctor, which is sometimes where it can spiral to, but it's truly about like, hey, we're just talking about this one tiny thing in the millions of things that you do as a veterinary professional. Let's focus in on that. And so it can feel loud to them. And so making sure we do it in a way that's safe too, right? I had a colleague come to me recently and say like, wow, this doctor took this very basic feedback and kind of escalated, like went unhinged with it. And I just had this moment where I let my colleague know, hey, the truth is this person this is probably the first piece of feedback this person is receiving. They graduated school at 26, maybe 29, and then they came out into the world and they've been a high achiever. And yes, while it's about notes or charts and they're not being done, and to you, that feels like a very isolated, not big deal thing. You know that they're a great doctor and you love and care about. For them, it is earth shattering because this is the first time someone has given them negative feedback. And so when we put our shoes on the other feet and our brains in the other person's experience, we can think about like, wow, okay, this probably was a really big deal. So I challenge that person, think back to when you were 21 and graduating from college and going out into your first job. Like that's what this veterinarian is experiencing. And how can we make it really safe? Hey, this isn't about your job. This isn't about your character. It is about this one specific thing that we can work on, and we can be precise in that. And we also recommend offering solutions, like help me brainstorm solutions with you so that way we can work on this together. It's not saying you're done with your charts. It's saying, hey, we missed the deadline for charts. Can we get you an AI scribe? What ideas do you have? Can we make you a little nook inside the office so you have a place to type where you're not going to be interrupted? Can we do something funny, like put a sign on your back saying like, don't talk to me, I'm doing my records, right? Like there's so many fun things, but make it a collaboration, make it a partnership. It feels a lot less threatening to the nervous system. It feels a lot more safe when you're saying, hey, we all have things to work on. This is the small thing, and I'm here to help come up with solutions. And you get to decide what solutions we, take on first. But this is ultimately the way that we can move forward together as a team in unison. You're not alone. You're not broken. Your self-worth is still intact. And then that slowly helps them get better and better feedback too, because they're receiving it in a safe and comfortable way. And then I think the last tip for this one is just like check in on them. Like you can assume that most of them are probably spiraling afterwards, nervous. So it's okay to follow up and be like, hey, just want to check in. How are you feeling? Or I actually made a meditation for this exact thing, for the spiral, because so many women in vet med face this spiral of how to make it stop. And so when I did the elevation for this one, I actually thought about like, you need to go up to the record player and unplug or like move the dial. I don't remember what it's called, but ultimately, like, can you go up to the CD player and press play or press pause? Because you don't have to keep spiraling on this. That is a choice. Martha Beck calls it choosing suffering versus pain. Pain is when it's real moment. Suffering is when you choose to play it over and over and over again. And that's an intentional choice. But we also have to learn the tools to shut down that part of our nervous system so we can move forward and see it as this is happening for me instead of happening to me.
Oh, so many good nuggets in there. I think the biggest takeaway that I took from what you just shared is just this separating the person from the behavior, right? Because I think that's ultimately what it comes down to is you hit the nail on the head when you talked about our identity. So much of our self is shaped around what we do. And so we conflate what we do with who we are. And so any threat to what we are doing not being right feels like we are somehow wrong and flawed, and it can just spiral. So really prefacing it with that individual to let them know this isn't about you as a person. This isn't about your worth as a veterinarian. This is about your records and getting them done on time or whatever it might be. So wonderful, wonderful advice, Bethany. Thank you so much. You are doing so many incredible things to support women in our profession. And I would love for you to share if our listeners want to learn more from you, get in touch with you, where is the best place for them to go?
Yes. So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. Beth the Vet, Dr. Beth the Vet. My full name is Dr. Bethany Weinheimer, but people would always call it Brittany or Weinheimer. So this is the shortened version. Yeah, I love it. And then also you can find me at Evolve Vet. And then of course we have a podcast online, which we briefly highlighted earlier. It's called the Evolve Vets Podcast. You can search on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all of the above. And the Evolve Vets has like a few offerings. One, we have a membership in community for women in veterinary medicine. We offer 30 race-approved CE hours. In this specific topic that we've talked about today, feedback in the meditations that we've organized within the Evolved Vets method is going to be released this summer for our summer evolution, which is really exciting. And then we also do coaching and women leadership work. Retreats are soon to come as well. So feel free to check us out at theevolvedvets.com. And yeah, those are really the best ways to get in touch with me. I look forward to connecting with each of you if this resonated or touches on things that feel deeply personal. Please let me know. I'm always eager for more stories and helping people along the journey. I think, Marie, you and I both are just thinking of ways to make vet med more sustainable for everyone. And then, the place I find my joy and community in is women specifically.
I love it. Well, I do hope that people reach out to you, and we'll link up to all of your resources and website and so on in the show notes as well. Bethany, before I let you go, we'll close with the same question that I ask all of our guests on the podcast. And that is, what does the phrase reviving veterinary medicine mean to you?
For me, reviving veterinary medicine is all around reviving the people in vet med. How can we go from proving culture, hustle culture, to living lives in aligned with our authentic values where we can have balance and peace and sustainable career where we don't have to get burned out and think that that's normal, but we can actually get to a place of having a trusted community with people that care and really just make this profession as amazing and wonderful as it is, and let us celebrate and love our jobs together. So I think it's all about community and reviving the people in veterinary medicine.
Beautifully said. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And thank you again for all of your time and wisdom on our episode for today. It's been great to have you.
Thanks, Marie. I appreciate you.
So that's it for this episode of Reviving Vet Med. I'm really grateful to Bethany for bringing such clarity and practicality to a topic that so many of us feel but rarely slow down to unpack. The way that she bridges neuroscience with leadership and lived experience is such a helpful reminder that how we communicate is never just soft skills. It's physiology, culture, and connection all at once. If this conversation resonated, please take a moment to share it with someone you know, who you think might also benefit from learning what their nervous system is asking for in these moments. Even small shifts in awareness can change the way we experience stress at work. You can learn more about Bethany and her work with Evolved Vets through the links in the show notes. A sincere thank you to Dr. Bethany Weinheimer for joining me today, to Podcast Prime Solutions for producing this episode, and to you, the listener, for continuing to show up for these conversations that help move our profession forward in a more sustainable way. Until next time, take care of yourself. Bye for now.